Yeah. All right. So good morning, good evening, wherever you're at. How you guys doing today? Today I'm super excited to talk. And by the way, the last time I mentioned I'm only going to be doing these about once a month now, just because the holidays are coming up and everything's so busy. But I'm super excited about this one because the tone, the topic. Now we're going to continue obviously on the trianistic model of reality. But the theme of my life since we've last talked has been something that I'll refer to as all things are equal in space. That's going to be the theme of what we're talking about, how all things are equal in space. And the reason that why it ties together with the trianistic model of reality is basically kind of how I always start off with these talks. I'm trying to demonstrate how something that seems conceptual, such as the trianistic model of reality, actually is about an experience, something that's your life, something that's something you can engage in, something that's direct. So I'm going to start things off differently today. But first, I want to describe what I mean by all things are equal in space. So we start off with my normal picture that I always got, but now I'm going to draw attention to what I mean by all things are equal in space. So basically what I'm saying is originally all there is aware space, but the nature of aware space was to be attracted to itself. And that's that line there, that split that attracts. And then you have aware space alone, which is that, but also the above part, which, this is the world, as we've correlated with my thing, that is aware space with the world. So that's still aware space, but the difference is now it's aware space with the world. So in Buddhism, they would tell you to look at this like the spacious sky. And here's the spacious sky where parts of it is obstructed by the clouds. So it's still aware space, but you have the clouds obstructing it. And so I guess that's the main point that I'm trying to point out, is that all is space, or we're saying is aware space. And when I say everything is equal in space, is meaning to see space. Now I'm going to bring out this picture again to the world. To see space in the world, or the void, here we're just using the word void. So underneath this picture is the void. The void appears as the world, but when you see the void in the world, that's what I mean by all things are equal in space. By noticing, by recognizing the space that's already there. You don't have to bring anything new to it. You don't have to add anything to it, but by recognizing the space that's already there, you see that all things are equal in space. And so that's why I want to start off a little bit differently today. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm not interested in practices or guided meditations, things like that. But thanks to Blanche, she had a really good idea and inspired me that I'm going to start off with something that is not a guided meditation. And the reason I say that, the reason I'm drawing a distinction is the reason I like practices or meditations is they start from the premise of otherness. They start from the premise of entering something. They start from the premise of you're here, now let's start something new. But instead, what's the word I used? Instead of seeking, we're going to practice just simple direct inspection by simply taking stock of what already is present. So that's what I want to do now. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this through the backup practice. So before we get into the triune talk, I want to start, and I want to just make sure nobody else is trying to get in. Oh, hold on one second. One person's trying to get in. Admit. Keep an eye on that. All right, let me say hello one more time, and then we'll get going. Oops, hold on. Somebody else tell. All right. How you doing, Susan?
Yeah, good.
Good to see you. All right.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
thank you. What I told everybody, well, I'm going to start off with something a little bit different today. I'm going to start off with us just taking stock of what already is present. So before we begin the talk, I just want to start by everybody, all of us, just examining what's here. And then I'll guide you through it. I'll guide you through the backup practice while we're just taking stock of what's here. So the first thing you do is just come to whatever bottom position you got, the most fundamental position you have when you just initially drop everything, whatever state you drop into. Everyone we'll just start there. And you can do it with eyes open or closed. I tend to go both ways. But just start by taking a moment of just dropping to your most basic state and just taking stock of presence. All right, so as we take stock of our presence, we notice, obviously, the only thing we notice is the words of my voice, but the words of my voice are appearing in space. And that's where we're going to direct our attention to. We're appearing to the direct space that the voice is appearing in from. And when we see this space, we see it has no qualities, has no shape, has no form, just pure space. And if we were to sit here long enough, well, actually, we don't have to because we have me talking. So as we hear me talking, we see the form. So when you listen to my voice, what you notice is that my voice is form, but the space that my voice is happening in is not form, it's formless. So then you notice my voice, my formed voice in this space. Then you notice whatever thoughts, feelings, tensions, subtleties arise with my voice, whatever's happening on your end, whatever is accompanying it. Obviously, you have your senses, the sounds, the shape, the feeling of your body. All these things are happening in space. Then, if you back up a little further, you could notice that with these forms, the witnessing that arises with the forms, that's also a subtle form of something that you could see, the sense of witnessing. Then you see that exist in space. Then even the sense of I am, you can see it, you can sense it, it's in space. And ultimately, we could keep backing up to see that being is in space. And this backing up just takes us to a place of nothing but dissolving. Like a black hole, nothing could exist, just pure dissolving. And that's it. I just want to draw your attention to that space, because that is the whole purpose of going into these concepts. Because in reality, all you're looking at is space. All you're experiencing is space. But we're not aware of the space. Just like we've heard in the the Zen books or the Tao books, how the fish don't know what they're swimming in. Space. It's aware space. So we don't notice the aware space. All we notice is the objects. And interestingly enough, what causes the objects, what causes that, if you remember, that split, it's the initial attraction of awareness, just awareness being attracted to itself is what causes that split. And interestingly enough, what resolves the split is the opposite of attraction, which is non-attachment. So that's what we're practicing. We're practicing non-attachment to resolve the split that happened from magnetic attraction. Now, the thing that you have to take into consideration too is it resolves on its own. And that's why everybody tells you it's perfect. It resolves on its own, just like when you push a wave. That wave, however much energy was pushed into the wave, it's going to resolve on its own. By however much energy was pushed on that wave, it's going to resolve. Once it's satiated to reach its point, then it's going to come down. So that's why when we practice gaining familiarity with space, because that has to be the direction of where our attention's at, where we're directing our attention. We're trying to become familiar with a deeper part of ourselves that's eternal. So we can see that all things are equal in space. So what I did was I put together something to where I want to demonstrate, once again, before we get to the trying, and we are going to get there, I want to demonstrate again why these concepts are important. Oh, here it is. All right. So everything that we're looking for, when we're looking for, because anybody that's, okay, so we're told that the reality, the ultimate reality, has these qualities. Infinite, it's still, what's that other one? It's ungraspable. It's shapeless. It's equal. It's unobstructed. It's measurable, unbounded, and singular. So the reason that we're going into the triune is to resolve the contradiction between what we're told is the ultimate reality, the actual reality, with what we actually experience, which is the opposite, the finite. The world is moving, it's graspable. No, actually, we know all these things are just appearances, that the world appears to be finite. The world appears to be moving. The world appears to be graspable. The world appears to be of shapes, appears to be unequal, appears to be obstructed, appears to be measurable, appears to be bounded, and appears to be multitudinal. So really, the reason that we have the triunistic model is to resolve how the infinite manifests as the finite. And obviously the way I've done it is with the bending. So flat, all there is, oh, this is the way I did it. This is the way I was thinking about it. Sorry. So flat, unobstructed, so undifferentiated, that's all there is. So if you just have a reality, just aware space, flat, these are the qualities. But the minute you bend it, the minute it's bended into itself, then all of a sudden those qualities appear as those qualities in the bend. That's the basic thing. Because of the bend, this appears as that. Just like with the leaf, just like with the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon picture, just like with everything. Because of the bend, when it bends, the infinite appears as finite. The still appears as moving. The ungraspable appears as graspable. So what I'm trying to say is this is our direct life. This is our direct experience. All right, so without further ado, now we'll continue from where we left off last time. So, and again, I'm just going to set it up with just the initial sentences that I usually set everything up with. Originally, there's only eternal aware space. And aware space naturally and necessarily invaginates from the magnetic attraction to itself thereby creating the appearance of duality. The bottom half of the circle represents the essence, just aware space alone. The original, the eternal, the undifferentiated, the infinite. The fold in the middle represents the nature of original aware space, which is to be aware. That's its nature. That's what it does. The top half of the circle represents the energy or the resultant duality that naturally arises from the inherent folding process. All right, so now we're going to get to the focus of this talk specifically. The focus of this talk is how everything in this world mirrors the qualities of that which created it. And that which created it is aware space. So originally, all there is aware space. So everything in this world that emerged from aware space is going to take on the same qualities of aware space, just as you take on the qualities of your parents. You can't help to. That's just the nature. That's all you are, is the inseparable result, or the result of the inseparability of your parents. You are the result of the inseparability of your parents. And this world is a result of the inseparability of aware space. All right. So since and now I'll go ahead and get out that model again, since I'll be referring to that. But since the top half, so we'll do this. All right. This up here for you. All right. So since the top half of the circle is only a reflection of the original, the bottom, it will be a mirror image of the original. Therefore, every quality of the original in the bottom half will manifest as a mirror image or its opposite in the top half. For example, the quality of being eternal down here will manifest in the top half as being temporal, or having the quality of time, which is the opposite of the quality of being eternal. Likewise, the bottom half quality of being undifferentiated will manifest in the top half as being differentiated, the world of the many. The infinite will manifest as finite, permanent will manifest as impermanent, etc., etc. We can see the evidence of this dynamic wherever and whenever we look at nature, by virtue of the fact that everything in nature is asymmetrical. That's the basic start of that's the basic dynamic in the first place. It's asymmetrical. Everything in the world is asymmetrical, just as the original architecture of the 360-degree circle diagram. The clearest example of where we see this asymmetry is the left and right side of our own faces and bodies, or the nodes, or the stems and the branches of any plant. Everywhere we look in nature, we find that one side is a copy of the opposite side, but always slightly off or asymmetrical, which is this, the original thing. A more challenging example of this spiral shape, a more challenging example is the spiral shape. And the reason is because the spiral shape is not just, what did I call it? Asymmetrical, but it's also that curving motion. It's also moving. So it's basically asymmetry in motion. That's why a spiral plays such a dynamic, because it's asymmetry in motion. So a more challenging example is the spiral shape that is found in every level of nature, from our DNA to the spiral galaxies. The spiral shape is also one of man's earliest religious symbols, pictured below to the left. So one of the earliest religious symbols is just that, just in a cave, a shaman just drawing a spiral, simple spiral. This blah, 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 which makes perfect sense when you consider that the spiral is the natural result of a bent or curved asymmetry. So if all we have is the basic asymmetry and the nature of it is a bend, the spiral is going to be the natural dynamic where things keep folding into itself, where everything contracts within itself, and then it unwinds. And that's what we call enlightenment. That's what we call the great undone is just the unwinding, or even death. When people describe death, just the unwinding of your brain. All people saying the whole past coming back, watching the whole thing review, or the judgment and all that is just your mind unspiraling, unfurling. And then life is the process of that spiral. And what we're practicing is death while we're alive, because you're trying to unspiral while you're alive. That usually happens after death, naturally, the unspiraling of your mind. So the reason that this feels so, what I want to say is like evolution is telling you not to do this, why you're getting so much resistance, why there's so much fear, is because you are practicing death, something that we're as survivors, as someone trying to survive, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. All right. All right, so pictured below makes perfect sense when you consider that the spiral is a natural result of a bent or curved asymmetry. And in true mirror-like fashion, the logarithmic spiral pictured below to the right is always and necessarily, as scientists say, scaled perfectly to the original curve. And as you can see, that's the identical thing. All right, so actually, I think I'm going to go to the next thing. So I think this is a good part to stop and ask if there's any questions. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of change the subject. So anything about the basic dynamic of the world having no choice but to mirror the original dynamic? Any questions or comments on that before I go on to the next part? Good. Awesome. That's one of my favorite dynamics, is that everything in this world mirrors that which created it in the first place. Which brings me to, and exactly it feeds into this, which by the way, dovetails perfectly back into why this is relevant to your life, relevant to your experience. So the next thing I was going to say is, it's all natural and it's all perfect. Everything is perfect just the way it is. Just like the contraction of the lungs or the heart or whatever. The contraction is not an error or something to be avoided. In fact, contraction is as vital to the system as expansion. On every single level, we find this to be true in nature. Why? Because it mirrors the original dynamic where everything is perfect, the contraction, the withdrawing. I was just thinking about how we as humans, that we praise expansion and we apologize for contraction when it's all part of the same movement. Everything is constantly evolving. After which you have the collection, which is expansion. The natural order is for the amassed collection, and whether we're talking about oxygen, whether we're talking about blood, or whether we're talking about energy or karma, on every single level that we look at in reality, the natural order is for this amassed collection, whether it be oxygen, blood, energy, karma, etc. It's to be dispersed, and contraction is simply the method or the conduit for this disbursement of said collected energy. We have to disperse the energy. And it is this contraction that is simply the method of taking this energy, this collection, disbursement. And this contraction not only disperses the energy, but makes room for the next expansion by creating that vacuum. It's all so goddamn simple, and the implication is that it is all perfect, even the tragic. I know it's horrible to say, but it's sad. I know it's horrible to say, but it's true. But I've always loved the blues man. Tragic circumstances are the seeds for character and soul. The blues man knows from their own tragic experiences the beauty of joyful participation in the sorrows of life. Seen in the proper perspective, the struggles of our lives are simply mirroring the original tension of basic desire, or what it's mirroring is attraction, just basic attraction. So the attraction of awareness to itself is experienced in the energy that manifests as desire. But desire satiates, just like a waveform. A desire is natural to arise, and a desire is natural to fall. And it's just as natural as we desires that we satiate and we learn from these desires, so these desires lead to our liberation. So the same space from which the suffering arises is the same space that liberation arises. It's the same thing, it's the same movement. This is another example of as above, so below. On the level of the substratum, or the original dynamic, there is the cyclic pulsation or contraction and expansion of itself that gives rise to the appearance of the world in the first place. Then, within that very world that was created from this cyclic original dynamic, the entire emergent world itself, in turn, sustains and maintains its own balance via the same exact dynamics of contracting and expanding cyclically. And we could look at that as, eating or digestive tract, collecting energy, the heart, the environment, how we're, eating each other. There simply could be no other way, as there's nothing else except for this original dynamic of aware space attracted to itself, resulting in the emergence of the potential within the awareness. And that's the multitude. The potential within the aware space is the multitude, because you got to remember what the aware space is. That's the infinite, that's the unbounded. So the potential of that is what you're seeing, the multitudes, but one at a time. That's obviously what you're experiencing, or experience is based on one at a time. That's what time is. All right. So let me say that sentence again. So there simply could be no other way, as there's nothing else except for this original dynamic of aware space attracted to itself, resulting in the emergence of the potential within that awareness. And that's the whole show, folks. But words can never do it justice. As simple as this sounds, it just keeps folding in on itself, transforming the very simple into an almost impossibly complex system of puzzles, illusions, and various tricks that keep us going, spiraling in circles. So let us continue on the spiraling path and see where it takes us. All right, so the qualities of the world mirror the qualities of that which created said world. Much like a child mirrors the qualities of the parents that created the child. So going back to this dynamic as above, so below, let's start with the original dynamic that is best depicted as the very simple yin-yang symbol. The yin-yang represents the union of seemingly opposites, thereby emerging as harmony. Thus, thus the emerged world is much like a child who has no choice but to effortlessly mirror the identical qualities of that which produced it. It is this triunistic union that created the appearance of our emerged world. And within that emerged world, the resultant male and female once again unite to create their own emerged child, which in turn will mirror the original dynamic by being attracted to its counterpart and replicating the whole process infinitely, ultimately engaging in yet another triunistic union. And this, folks, is the only game in town. The only thing the universe is possible of doing. This is the only dynamic that has ever existed, and this is the only dynamic that could ever exist. This is the very design of life itself. Below are just some examples that I have observed in nature that demonstrate how the emerged world that we all experience mirrors the same qualities of that which created it. So now what I'm about to read is basically a result of me spending 10 years in the woods, walking around with my pugs and having the Dharmakaya teach me through the forest its secrets. And I'm just walking around and all the secrets are being told to me through nature, through what we see, through what the Nirmanakaya. Everything in the emerged world exists in outer space, which mirrors the original dynamic of all appearances existing in the field of aware space. So just like how we started off that practice where I was showing you that everything exists in aware space, my voice, your thoughts, the sense of you, the sense of a witness, the sense of I am, any arising exists in aware space. And scientists tell us that this cup exists in time space. They're not talking about the same space. They're not talking about aware space. They're just talking about time space, that everything that you see exists in time space. It's mirroring the original dynamic, the actual dynamic. Everything is alive. Everything is organic. This mirrors the original undifferentiated awareness. Because remember, all there is aware space. So everything in this world is either going to take up the quality of either awareness or space. So everything's alive. That's taken on the dynamic of the original thing, which is the aware aspect of aware space. So everything's alive. The trees, the molecules, the atoms, everything we just know is life. In my biology class, when I was in college, the very first question the professor asked us is, what is the definition of life? And the answer was, there is no answer. Whatever you raised your hand and said, you were wrong, because according to him, there is no definition for life, which I love because we're life itself. So how could life give itself a definition? So I love that. All right. Next is I noticed that the power of attraction drives the process of creation itself. Just as the original self-attraction of awareness, now we have vortexes, black holes, gravity, contraction. All of these things mirror the original tension of the self-attraction of awareness. The planets coming together, colonies coming together, cells coming together, people coming together. I'm about to say all this, so I'm probably getting ahead of myself. All right. The next thing I noted was seeds, eggs, and brains. Think about those three things: seeds, eggs, and brains. They're all examples of a whole world contained in potential and ultimately emerging inside out. This mirrors the original dynamic of all of the existence appearing in imagination or aware space. So just like everything arises from and in and back into aware space, the same thing with the seeds, the eggs, and the brains. They're all examples of a whole world contained in potential and ultimately emerging inside out. Once they're agitated, there's the suffering. They have to be agitated. The seed does not fruit until it's agitated. All right, where are we? All right, next one is I noticed that the infinite, the eternal, we could never find an end. So even in this world of the finite, we still can't find an end. You know, the whole thing with the quarks, and they're looking for the thing. When I was growing up, the bottom part was the atom, then it was the quarks, then it's the bottom quark, now it's the reshons. They just keep digging. They can't find an end. Their horizon's got no end. Everything they even measure, even that's got no end to it. So all we find, and I use the asymptote as an example. It's a thing that physicists use. It's a model for, it's a never-ending curve. If you Google an asymptote, it's what physicists use as a measuring tool called it's a never-ending curve. So if all these things that exist in nature, the asymptote, the endless horizon, they're all mirroring the original unmanifest, which is by its very nature immeasurable. So even the appearances of measurable we're finding out we can't actually measure them. We're measuring them, but the more you dig deeper, the more you're finding out whatever you thought was real was actually just an aggregate of something smaller. And you're like, okay, but at least those smaller things were real. Well, actually, that smallest thing is not real. It's just an aggregate of something smaller. All right, well, at least those small things are real. No, actually, even that small thing is just an aggregate, and you're never going to find nothing that's not an aggregate until you get down to just pure nothing, pure imagination, pure mind. All right, the next thing I found was the world is illusory. Nothing being graspable mirrors the original dynamic of the original manifest, being absent of any inherent existence. So once again, I'm kind of repeating what I just said. Even though the world appears as graspable, we find out we actually can't grasp it. And that's what I mean by the measuring and the trying to understanding and the trying to any type of controlling or put it on a petri dish. We just can't grasp it. It seems graspable. I give it that. It has the appearance of graspability. But ultimately, any scientist will tell you it's all elusive and ungraspable. All right, the next one is, and that mirrors the fact that it has no inherent existence. All is connected, all is a continuum. Again, it mirrors the original continuum of the triunity. So when we look at nature, we see that everything's continued, everything's connected or a continuum. Every dynamic, from how we eat, the relationships of weather, our digestive systems, in relationship with the brain, just everything that we see is connected or symbiotic is another word to use. All right, one in many. Another example I saw is that there's the one in many or the individual / the whole. So the original dynamic of the one in many are mirrored out in this emergent world as individuals colonizing to make various wholes. So what do? We mimic the original dynamic, whether we coordinate in armies or entire branches of government or villages or towns or countries. That's what we do. We come together, we colonize from attraction, from that basic attraction, community. We can't help ourselves but to mirror the original dynamic from whence we all came. All right, next thing is evolution. Yes, once again, the original dynamic is always evolving because remember, the whole includes the top half of the circle that is in a constant state of evolution. So although the bottom half of the circle remains unchanged and unmoved, the top moving half of the circle is an aspect of the original dynamic, and that is evolving. And we're talking about the whole, not just the unmanifest. The next dynamic that I noticed is that filters create specifics of reality. This mirrors the original dynamic where the process of individuation is the original filter that transforms the unmanifest into the dualistic world that we experience. So basically, the world that we experience is a result of the original filter, just awareness being attracted to itself. That mirrors out in this world that the way we experience reality is through filters. And what I mean by that is how the brain, we wouldn't be experiencing the world if our brain wasn't constantly just filtering out useless information and organizing the information in a usable way. Next that I noticed in nature is that I see that there is multiplication, there's division, there's copying, there's mirroring, there's replicating, etc. All are the tricks that the one employs to appear as many. So in this world, it's all we're seeing is multiplication and division and copying and mirroring and replicating. That's all that's capable of doing because all there is the one folding in, dividing, multiplying, shaping, reshaping itself as the many. All right, next, only two more, by the way. As a matter of fact, it is my contention that one day we will discover that there was never such a thing as addition or subtraction in the first place. It is all multiplying or dividing because in the ultimate dynamic, there is only the singular. And the folding and unfolding of the singular is the only movement of the singular. And these folds of the singular imply that no part can ever be added or taken away from the whole. Instead, the whole can only fold itself, creating divisions and multiplications of itself. And I'll use a fresh piece of paper to explain what I mean by that. What I'm saying is my prediction is that sometime in the future, scientists are going to discover, or mathematicians, whoever's in charge of all this, is going to discover that there's no such thing as addition and subtraction. It's all an illusion. So this is what I mean by that. All there is, so let's say if you wanted to get to 2, you don't add 1 plus 2. That's addition. That would be assuming that there's 2. There's not true. There's only the singular. So instead, it multiplies. And now you have 2. It doesn't add anything. It multiplies. And then if you want 4, it'll multiply again. Now we have 4. You want to multiply again. So the one thing is capable of multiplying or going backwards, dividing. But it's never capable of adding or subtraction. Subtraction is an illusion. If you want to, now we see subtraction. You're telling me I see subtraction all the time. You're seeing division. You're seeing multiplication. You're not seeing addition. You're not seeing addition. You're not seeing subtraction. You can't subtract. You could divide. You can multiply infinitely, but you can't add. Anyway, that's just one of the observations that I noticed. And the very last one, but my favorite 3 dynamics play out in this emergent world that mirrors the original dynamic are potentiality. All we see in the scientific world, all we see in the observable world is potentiality, magnetism, and emergence. That's it. Everything under the sun is going to fall under the category of potentiality, magnetism, and emergence. Originally, there's only potential. The act of magnetic attraction spontaneously transformed the potential into an emergence, or as an emergence, as I like to say. But the experience of time does not enter into the equation until the emergent obscures the potential. So you can't even explain the original dynamic in temporal terms. Nevertheless, we do see that potentiality, magnetism, and emergence play out in the most crucial roles in every aspect of the physical sciences. I view these 3 specific components as the most fundamental to the countless examples of the triunes that we find in nature. All right, so I'm going on to a new part after this. So before we go on to that, any questions about any of that or comments about any of that?
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Rod, or Art, I'm sorry, I saw both of you guys. So
No worries. Can you clarify on your original document where you held up, infinite, boundless, various things, and then you finite and all that? You have on the infinite measurable. Would that be immeasurable? And then on the finite,
I did. That's funny you notice that. I had yeah, they're wrong. They're transfixed. I noticed that when I read it, but I didn't admit to the mistake. But thanks for pointing that out.
No,
You're right. Well, that's good to mean you're paying attention. You're right. That's immeasurable, and then there's measurable. You're absolutely right.
So now, when you look at mirroring, if we look at mirroring, would be reflective. So if I held a pencil in front of a mirror, I would see a pencil. Here you're saying we're seeing the opposite of the mirroring creates instead of a reflection, more of a refraction.
And I don't understand refraction, so tell me what refraction is. But I do understand your basic point about the mirror. But also, when you're looking at the pencil in the mirror, isn't it the opposite of the pencil you're seeing when it's not in the mirror? Isn't the reflection of it the opposite? Like if you had words on the pencil, wouldn't the words be backwards?
Correct. Like when I look at a mirror, my face is the left is the right.
Bingo. So it
Yes.
appears, so the mirror appears as the opposite of what it's reflecting. So exactly, so the opposite. That's why the still would appear as motion, just like the letters would appear the opposite in the mirror. This would appear as opposite.
Like ambulance.
Correct.
They write it backwards on their vehicle so that when you see it, it looks correct.
Bingo. Exactly. Yes. And thank you for pointing that out. That means you're paying attention. The immeasurable appears as measurable.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. And
The only thing I would add, Mark, is, you know, you talk a lot about attraction,
yes.
and at the same time, it's also about, what's the opposite of attraction?
Repulsion.
Repulsion. It's, you know, because, you know, it's like 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, you know, and fractals, and you always need to include it. You were talking about, you know, we're practicing death, you know, we're in death, you know, it's the winding up and the winding down. It's always winding up and it's always winding down. It's doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
But our perceptions are only sequential.
And I'm glad you brought my attention to that. So you just said something really deep I want to write down. Repulsion. Okay. I want to write that down. And the reason that's important to include that is because I just thought about that. In all dynamics, I'm always noticing there's only two things. And thank you, Newbin. I'm getting you next. There's two things I noticed. You're either going to come to this path through either two ways. You're either going to come to it from the love of it, just for the love of the void, the love of emptiness, the love of space, or from the opposite, from getting beaten down from reality, from the opposite of having your efforts and the trying, making you suffer so much that you come to this path as a last resort. So there's two things. There's the attraction and the repulsion. So going back to what you were talking about, the repulsion in this instance, what we're talking about would be the fear of death, the fear of annihilation, the fear of this. This is the repulsion. The attraction is up here. Everything we're doing is attracted to everything up here, and we're repulsed by this. This is why we're repulsed by silence. We're repulsed by stillness. We're repulsed by inactivity. We're repulsed by nothingness. We're repulsed by vacuum. We're repulsed, and we're attracted to movement and bright lights and catchy things and smells and shapes and things like that. So yes, you're absolutely
When we're
right.
identified with those appearances.
Absolutely. And
Like
at
if
the
you're
same
not
time,
identified with the appearances, it's not that big of a problem.
and that's all we see. But what you're pointing out is what we don't see is the repulsion to this. All we talk about is the attraction to this. But what we didn't speak about, or at least what I didn't speak about, is what was unconsciously also is happening is the repulsion to this. So he's right. They're both happening, but we only notice what's happening in the world. So there's an attraction to this, but at the same time, Rod's pointing out there's an unconscious repulsion from this that we're not aware of. And you're not aware of it until it happens. And that's what meditation's about. That's why it's uncomfortable. That's why all of this is uncomfortable. That's why it's uncomfortable, because we're repulsed by it. So thanks, Rod. Did you want anything to add to that before I move on to Newbin?
No, I think that
Yeah.
it's basically all I was just trying to say. It's a zero-sum game. The reason there's only nothing or space is because appearances are coming into space and going and leaving it as well.
Yes, exactly. Coming and going, brother. Coming and going. Thank you, Rod. I appreciate that. All right, Newbin. Question or comment?
Kind of like comment. Can you hear me first? Like, this is a new pair of headphones.
Yes, sir. I can hear you perfectly, Newbin. If I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah. So yeah, the repulsion part, I was thinking about it. It's almost like we're avoiding the void or the act of doing nothing. And for me, it was the other way around, like beaten down by reality. It's almost like I became like this weird, just super cerebral ADHD kind of mind where I had to give it up because it was like, I was like, I can't sustain it anymore. And the dropping part was like, which made me realize that this is what I was running from, which was actually like in that moment felt very comfortable, like that silence. And I could finally see like what what tips and things about meditations, they finally made sense to me and I also realized that there's no amount of trying that will get you to, I mean, the trying is like a guidebook, but when it happens by itself. It's almost like a gift from whatever reality. And the second thing I wanted to add was about time was that you made a great point that like if you back out far enough like to the base of aware space, there's no time. And I think it's because there's no relativity. It's not even aware of itself yet. So there's no reference. So why would it need to measure? It's like it adds to your point of it's infinite. So like there's no reference. So like how long it goes, you have to like put a stake in the ground and then say, oh, this is the reference, and then you have to measure it.
It offers no contrast. There's no contrast.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's great. Thank you, Nubin. If you don't want to go on, I want to go back to something you said, unless you want to add more to that.
No, I was done. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Nubin. Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about how you can't try. That's beautiful. I appreciate that. And the reason why I say you can't try is just because it's whatever the wave, what we're talking, any experience is a waveform. In the waveform, the initial energy started at the beginning of the wave. So that wave has to see its way through. And that's what we're calling satiating. To have your desires satiated is to have that waveform complete itself before it rests. And the energy that got pushed into that wave is going to have to carry itself. And we don't know. That's what I'm saying. You can't control it because the energy of that wave is what it is. So the only thing you can do is, going back to what I said, is just practice understanding. So the next wave won't have as much energy. And then the next wave won't have as much energy. But you're right. You can't try it because the energy of the moment that we're in now was already started from the energy that started this wave that we find ourselves in this moment. And the only thing we could do is improve or adjust our understanding of reality, this whole dynamic that we're talking about, which is space, improve our understanding of space that already is. So then the next wave that we're creating, it won't be as big, large, or believable. Does that sound good to you, Nubin?
Yeah, I would say like the next wave, there's almost like an increase or like a next level of you become aware of more like what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all understanding. We agree. I agree.
You kind of did wrong. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, John, how you doing today?
I'm okay, I guess. Yourself?
I'm doing real good. What's on your mind today, John?
I'd like to repeat that passage with the filters. Filters create specifics of reality. This mirrors the original dynamic where the process of individuation is the original filter that transforms the unmanifest into the dualistic world we all experience. So that's what I'm referring to in my question. And so in the original dynamic, there's a filter that separates out whatever appears from the infinite potential, right? However, what's the nature of that filter? Does it belong to the infinite, or does it belong already? Is it already downstream? It's already downstream, right?
It's already in, exactly. It's already infinite. And that's why I'm so obsessed with combining the word of aware space. You can't separate the two. And that's what you're basically getting at, is the space. The void is active. That's why I love this example of a black hole, because it's nothing, but it's not just nothing, it's active. And I think that's what you're pointing to. I think you're pointing to this, the potential is already active. It's not just potential, but the seed for the potential is already in, everything included. I think that's what you're pointing at, but I won't put words in your mouth.
Well, hey, John, what if, okay, so here's the nothingness and it attracts itself. The filter is actually, say, the distance. Notice how the distance is longer at the top and shorter at the bottom. That's the inherent filter. So if you're looking at yourself close up at the bottom, if the infinite's looking at itself down at the apex of this, right? You're going to see something different than if you're looking at it up here, than if you're looking at yourself up here, where my fingers are. That's the inherent filter, I believe. It's just like the condition. The condition is different down here,
yes,
than it is up here. and that's the inherent filter. Does that make sense? It's the filter is just a part of it. It's just the dynamic of that process.
Well, may I try to motivate my own question further? I mean, there's all sorts of worlds which could arise from the infinite potential. And however, we are experiencing some specific world according to the filter that is responsible for selecting this manifestation from the infinite potential, right?
Not selecting. I wouldn't say selecting. I would say it was guided from the last one. It was a result of the last one, not selecting. I don't think anything's ever selected. The natural selection. Yeah. Okay.
Well, could there have been a completely different universe?
And there is. I do think. Yeah, absolutely. I think.
Yeah. So then that other universe has another filter, right? A different filter from the one we're in, right?
Yes. I think we're saying the same thing.
So is it possible that when you say filter, it's just a word for the fact that all of these different potentials are arising simultaneously?
Yes.
And it's just from downstream looking back upstream that we call the pathway that our manifestation took as our filter. So basically the filter is nothing else than the particular pathway of folding that results in our particular manifestation, and some other folding would result in a different manifestation.
Absolutely.
And so this way of folding is the filter, right? I mean, in the coarsest sense, the filter is, as you said, our brain, but that's already very, very, very far downstream. The original filter must be much more subtle and much more powerful.
Yes.
So at that level, is the filter maybe just a manner of speaking for the fact that there's every pathway of possible manifestation is being taken, because otherwise the potential wouldn't be infinite, right?
Yes.
If there is any potential that is never manifested, then that's not a potential.
Yes.
So
I wouldn't say
is
that,
it possible? Is it possible for the potential to contain a possibility that is never manifested?
I love that question, and that's we could go into that question right off the bat. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that's what the multitude is. It expresses itself infinitely, but we're limited. Now we come down to the level of experience. So experience is limited. So experience is going to be one at a time. So yes, to the question, every single possible multitude is there, but it's experienced at one at a time. And that's where we're experiencing limitations. And that's why I think the words of the masters get construed by people to where people think that they're expecting something, but it's based on their perception, like you said, based on their filter. So their filter, they're in the same world where they're suffering. Put it this way, every master, Ramana Maharshi, Jesus, whatever, they lived in a world where simultaneously, as they were describing the world as bliss, they knew there was murder and mayhem all around them. And yet at the same time, all they could tell you about was the world that they were perceiving. And that's what I think answers your question. It's the same world of potential, the same space, but in this space, depending upon your perception, your understanding, what appears here could appear as nirvanic or samsaric based on your understanding. And the correct understanding you're trying to get to is just recognizing the space. And then when you recognize the space, then you see that all things are equal in space. But without that same thing appears as topsy-turvy and bad and horrible, but it's just from a misunderstanding, of misapprehension of what it is. But basically, the potential is all there. So I hope, does that answer your question, or just cause more questions?
Yeah, well, not really, because my interest is in the particular in the meaning of the particular word of filter. For me, it makes sense that if the potential manifests all of its potential, or the ground of the unmanifest manifests all of its potentials simultaneously.
Yes.
Of course, downstream, you only observe the manifested potential that is your own upline.
Yes.
So you're, and looking back up to the principle of manifestation, you perceive the whole upline of your manifestation as a filter. For instance, your brain, right? If you look backward, you can't see everything. You can only see what your brain allows. So the brain is a filter. Maybe you go into deeper samadhi, and then your consciousness expands, but you're still not omniscient. There's another filter of a psychic nature or whatever. And the further up you go, you notice, well, there's a series of decreasing filters, which are nothing else than the structure of the manifestation itself, the end of which is this person here. So that would make sense to me if by filter you just mean the whole river of manifestation itself as seen for us.
Yes. Yes.
But if it were otherwise, then then I would have a problem, because I would not understand where the filter comes from.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, how can infinite potential contain a filter? It shouldn't, right?
No.
Either it manifests all its potential, or it can't do anything.
And that's why, John, that's why I started off with this very first picture that I love, which what I've been obsessed with this week was all things are equal in space. So this is what you're talking about. So this is basically the best way to explain it is by looking at a cloud. You could see where unobstructed, and you could also see where it's obstructed. So the sky could appear as obstructed, but if you have that contrast of space, you could see the difference between a cloudy sky and not a cloudy sky. And most of us live in a world where there's nothing but clouds and we have no contrast. So all I'm trying to do is draw your attention to the space so you can see the contrast, and that's the address. Now you just cultivate that. As much as you love that space, you're going to be attracted to that space. In the direct proportion of much you love and you're attracted to that space, the more you're going to see the space in the world, just like the rainbow. If you were to see the rainbow and get a perspective where you see the light getting bent and you're saying, aha, I can see the white light and the rainbow at the same time. So I'm not buying the colors. I'm seeing them, but I'm not buying them because I have that contrast.
Okay. Well, since you use that bending of the light metaphor, may I frame my question in those terms? Assume you have a different universe in which I have 6 fingers. Everybody has 6 fingers on his hands, usually. Or in that world, the women are pursuing the men, or whatever, right? So you have a different universe. But the way the unmanifest becomes that world with the 6 fingers is just a set of conditions, right? Of refraction, of the style of bending the light, the style of refraction. It just results in a world with people with 12 fingers. And so when these people with 12 fingers now ask themselves, what is the filter that gave me 12 fingers, 6 on each hand? They would discover nothing else than these conditions, this style of refraction that simply results in that universe. And our style of refraction is such that we have 10 fingers. So is that what you mean by filter? It's just the set of conditions or the style of refracting in that crystal that refracts light?
Two things. Yes, that the initial one is everything is based on that. Everything is going to have a filter because of the attraction. So this is the original filter that Rod was pointing out. Because of the initial filter, that attraction to itself, whatever appears on that side is always going to do the active filtering. And then these filters are going to get more and more complex as you get down there. Now, what causes each filter to filter, like I said, is each waveform, is each base path and fruit. The fruit becomes the base for the next thing. For the path. So
but the paper it could bend this way, it could bend this way,
and that's why yes.
And so all of these different ways of folding the paper happen simultaneously, or what?
And if you watched one of my talks, that's what I said is exactly going on. I took the piece of paper and it's crumbled, and all these infinite bends or curves are all the examples of what I have in my first book cover of the diamond vision, of every single possibility of molecules and cells and people and every single one, because you're right, John, it can be bent in every infinite way, and it is bent in every single infinite way.
So that style of bending, this particular complex style of bending, is the filter.
Yes, is a filter, a filter. The only thing I would, yes, a filter, yes, absolutely, yes. Yes.
So any universe that is shaped differently would have a
Mhm.
different style of bending, and that would be its filter.
A result of a filter, exactly, a different one. Absolutely.
Yeah, but the filter is nothing else than this bending.
Yes,
What?
that is it. Yes. The bending and the result are one. Yes. The bending and the result, yes, the bending is the filter. Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering because suddenly this word filter came up, and it was somehow alien to the conception of this cosmology. Is filter? Where does the filter come from? So we've got the filter.
Everything that I'm obsessed with, if you notice, John, everything, the thing that I seem to be always obsessed with is self-arising. The thing that I keep driving everything back into the wedge is this concept, or not concept, I guess, but this dynamic of self-arising. We got into it last time with Rod. You weren't there, but he was talking about like what caused it, but what caused that initial thing. And it's implicit within it in the first place. It's that tension of aware space. It's all implicit in what it is in the first place. So
yeah. So, but since it is the filter and the style of filtering that determines the shape of the resulting cosmos, then the question could arise: what makes it bend in this particular style? And the other thing is, well, you could answer, it bends in every possible style.
Actually, no.
Every possible style is resulting in its own universe, which happens to be separate from ours because it's fundamentally bent differently. So
now I think you're talking about a deeper point than I'm talking about. I think what you're talking about is actually deeper true than I'm talking about. I'm still trying to stay down in the world of where, life and happening. You're talking about, gosh, and I just lost exactly what you're talking about. Let me think about this for a second.
Well, I could help you focus. Just ask yourself, what tells the unmanifest, or the paper, let's not talk about my unmanifest, the paper, what tells it to bend in this particular way?
Yeah. And again, with that question, I would say whatever caused that wave to get there in the first. Okay, here's what it is, John. And this is a way to, the way I explain it, is our desires inform the next desire. In other words, like the TV show, I always bring up Fantasy Island. So it starts off with an idea, I want this. You think you want this, like I want that, so you chase that. Once you get that, and that desire is satiated, you no longer want that desire, but it makes you think you want a different desire. So that filter was born from the resolving of that past filter. But the point that you're getting to, which is much deeper, you're talking about beyond reincarnation, beyond appearances, how the life in the storehouse work of basically what I'm hearing from you is the difference between reincarnation and just life itself, what it would look like from a bird's eye view of just life informing itself and taking care of itself and following its attractions with no sense of reincarnation. So I think what you're talking about is a deeper thing where it's basically just being guided by, like I said, the shape of whatever the dynamic it is, shape of whatever dynamic it is. So to answer your question, I'd say whatever the next filter is, it's going to be created by the preceding one before it. And like I said, it's going to be whatever you learn from it, whatever's evolved, whatever you learned from that last attempt at the waveform, that's going to inform the next waveform. And that's why it's all about understanding. For me, it always comes about to just basic understanding. But
see, I think this is very instructive, because my suspicion, and that warrants a whole other deep dive for us. So I'm not going to expand on it here, but I suspect what you say there is that there's already in this selection of the filter, there must already be some sort of preference, or there must be some subtle tendencies that lead to its, or I got a message from Nubin now that it wants to do.
Yes.
So that would remind me of the Buddhist concept of the alaya vijnana, which is not, so the unmanifest that you're talking about is not the pure Buddha nature yet. It must already contain tendencies of a very subtle sort
Yes.
that give rise to a particular kind of manifestation.
Yes.
And that arising from prior seeds of whatever actions or tendency have gone before. So that to me is an indicator of something we would have to expand on in another place.
No, that's beautiful.
Why I think that this is that you're talking about. I mean, aware space is okay. It's very close to the ultimate truth, but it already seems to contain habitual tendencies, and that makes it yes. different from the Buddhist point of view. It makes it different from the ultimate reality because it's already conditioned in a subtle way, and that's what they call the alaya vijnana. Okay,
beautiful.
I'm just
no beautiful. Thank you.
So I don't want to keep people up further.
No,
so
no, I'm going to move to Debbie next, but before I do, I just want to circle back to something you just said, because you're absolutely right. And my attempt at trying to hint at what John was just talking about, what before was talking about just starting with essence, nature, and energy. That prior to aware space, he's absolutely right. Just pure essence. Before that, so he's right. And that is something important that I do want to get into. But I do want to also hear what Debbie has a question about. So thank you, John. I really appreciate that. Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'm actually just diving a little deeper into what John was saying, or asking for some clarification. How are you defining universe when you said there are other universes? Are you referring to different planes of existence that we would still have access to, or something completely different?
No, I just meant anything manifesting.
Okay.
So our word universe is sometimes used equivocally or not uniquely. So I apologize for having used it. I just mean a manifestation. Whatever
you could have said world.
A world of appearances.
Okay.
I didn't mean this particular starry night cosmos. I mean the whole shebang from the absolute unmanifested through all the subtle regions down to the coarsest appearances that we call space-time, which is already very, very coarse. So I mean the whole thing from the most subtle layer. So if you have a world with angels and deva realms or whatever, all of that is one manifestation.
Okay.
So you might have a completely different manifestation where you have three genders, three sexes or whatever, and all the gods and goddesses and godlums are three genders, whatever. Right? So I mean, when I say world, I mean this whole manifestation starting from the unmanifest. So even a creator God would already be specific to a particular manifestation.
Yeah.
Wow. So there would be others that we would have no access to ever. Parallel universes that we would have no access to.
If that is true, if there is such a thing, if the unmanifest actually really manifests all of its infinite potentialities simultaneously, if that's the case, then this is a trivial corollary. It's not my opinion. But I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying I was just curious about what he means by filter. So this whole thought experiment about the multiple manifestations was just to get Mark to put pressure on him so he can tell me what he means by filter. Yeah. So I'm not claiming anything here. I'm not making any. I'm not into any speculations here. I'm just trying to squeeze.
Hey, Debbie, just to say more about your question, if you look at Tom Campbell's work, he's talking
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
He's looking at worlds all the time.
That's right.
Different
That's why
he visits worlds like what John was talking about, you know.
Well,
Yeah,
but he has talked about
however,
worlds
when
that we're not
John,
allowed to come into or interact with our world or universe ever. And he's,
well, if Tom Campbell is visiting another universe, in my use of the term other world, that would still be the same world. That if he can access horizontally, if Tom Campbell can horizontally access another cosmos, that in my view is still the same manifestation, because
right.
an entirely different manifestation could never be accessed horizontally. It can
Well,
only be
and I believe
accessed through
Tom
the,
even talked about,
Yeah, that's
there we use the
final.
word, some sort of Godhead overseeing the universe, and that it would keep it from ever touching another universe.
yeah. But let me just say, this is getting into a speculation that I do not want to use Mark's time on his triune principle
Okay.
on. And I'm also emphasizing that I'm myself agnostic about the whole thing. I just wanted to use this thought experiment to get him to tell me what he means by filter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm agnostic. I'm not claiming anything, and I'm herewith exiting the discussion about multiple manifestations.
Thank you. Hey, but I want to circle back to this because you guys brought up something I'm really interested in. So I want to circle back to it anyway. Tom Campbell is the name you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a curiosity about this. I'm not familiar with Tom Campbell, but I am familiar with Robert Monroe, and I think it's Ashley. Or are you the one that's familiar with the Monroe Institute and stuff like that? I guess it's somebody else I was thinking of. But anyway,
Tom Campbell was one of the founders of Monroe Institute.
Oh,
He was one of the original engineers.
Gotcha. Okay.
Who worked on the science
Okay.
behind Bob's stuff.
Okay.
And I'll mute myself now. And
Okay,
I think it's perfectly fine to hijack Mark's
yeah, absolutely.
discussions.
No, I love, I mean, I have a question for you guys. That's why if you see me searching through my notes and stuff, I have a question for Debbie and Rod, as they're familiar with Todd Campbell or Tom Campbell. Here's my question, because this is not something that I'm not declaring, because I don't even know what the answer is in tradition. So John would be able to be helpful with that. But I'm also interested in Rod's perspective of, and Debbie's from Todd's perspective, from Tom's perspective. All right. So since I wrote that book, The Trianistic Model of Reality, as I wrote it, oh, thank you. I see, the big theory of everything. I have heard of that. Yes. So I know who he is, the big towel. I know. Yep, you're right. All right. The way I can't, what keeps coming up for me more and more is that there is not a world. And I'm not deciding this. I pay more deference to the traditions and people, the old school traditions, because they got a lineage in infinity. But my suspicion is that there is not a world. My suspicion is that there's just infinite black holes. And what I mean by there's not a world, there's imagination, there's aware space, and anything could fit in aware space, whether it be out-of-body experiences, the Bardo, the different worlds, the stuff that Tom Campbell's talking about. My overall point is that everything is happening in aware space. But more specifically, what I'm suspicious of is that the aware space is that there is no single universe. There's no such thing as a single universe. There's just infinite. And going back to that wrinkled up piece of paper, do I have to wrinkle up another one? Yeah, wrinkle up another one. That all these folds, there's just infinite black holes. And each black hole is a universe. So I'm curious, Debbie and Rod, if Todd talks about that there is no universe, no single universe, except if you want to talk about the universe like that, just a plain empty field to which anything could happen. So I either see, like, you want to talk about a universe, there's the universe, but specifically, there's our universe. And what I mean by our universe, this thing right here, the black hole is what creates it. All there is awareness, and it creates a loop. And everything in my world is just a tiny little bubble. It doesn't really exist. It's just an appearance in that aware string. So each of us, I have one and you have one, and I got a picture of endless loops. So I'm curious, Debbie and Rod, how that fits into Todd's scheme.
So Tom, Debbie, do you mind? I'll just.
Oh, please.
I've read Tom's book, all 900 pages. And basically, he says the same thing everyone else does in just a different way. He's a physicist. So basically, he's talking about, he goes, there's something that you can't know, you can't know it. But he gives it a name called unbounded, unbounded. Anyway, it's a potential. It's just a potential. And then he calls it unbounded manifold. So it's basically, it just starts dividing itself into what it calls, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Let me decline that real quick. He says it just divides itself into what he calls reality cells.
Ah, yes.
The
Okay, so-
individuated units.
Go ahead,
What did
Newman.
Newman say? I didn't hear what Newman said.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just saying that the term is individuated units of consciousness or something like that.
Yeah, but he starts out with something. It's not even, it doesn't even get into, he doesn't, in the beginning, he doesn't even get into individuated units of consciousness. That actually happens later. The first thing he calls it is a reality cell, so that there's something other than the nothing. And then that divides, and that goes through a process. And consciousness goes from nothingness to very dim to something that starts being aware, so to speak. And then he just says there's only two fundamental things in the world, and that's unbounded potential and the fundamental process known as evolution.
Yeah.
And it's always constantly trying to lower entropy. Now, he's a physicist, so he's coming at this from a
I'm
physicist standpoint.
curious if his what you're talking about, is that resemble like the thing of that where each, just all these individual worlds?
It does get to that. He does get to that because he talks about how, through meditation, he was just able to go somewhere and see something else. Like he's been to places where the people hover 6 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
He doesn't like to talk too much about the specifics of where he goes because he's like, it's all happening here.
Yes.
But he also talks about some very strange things that happened to him here as a result of, here we go. We're going to get into a whole thing again, like the lowering of the filters.
Mhm.
Like there's just certain filters that kind of get blown away,
Mhm.
and you'll start, he got rid of them after a while because it was too hard to live. Like you don't want to see a bright sunlight void opening up in front of you 6 feet away. It's too hard to function. So you just close it off and you keep going.
Yeah.
That's, but that's 900 pages you got to get through to kind of get his whole thing down.
No, I appreciate that. But I'm still curious though, also in Debbie and John too as well. Am I the only one that's thinking that there is no universe except for like what that guy just talked about, infinite universe? Like like I'm saying, there's a universe, 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 and they're all black holes.
They're all,
It's a
well,
black hole.
they're all the nothingness. They're still ultimately
Yeah.
all the nothingness.
All
Hey,
right.
Mark,
Yes, sir.
quick
All right.
question.
Thank you, Art.
So you guys are talking about almost ascribing to the, unlimited potential or the base as having some volition through
No.
that tension.
I don't think anybody is doing that. I haven't heard anybody do that.
Yeah. So anything that's appearing apparently appears. So we're ascribing meaning to its appearances then.
Mhm.
So therefore we're ascribing meaning to its non-appearance as well
Yes.
by
No,
proxy.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that's why in Zen they'll say open mouth already a mistake, but you have to say something.
Sure.
Here we are. So yeah. Thank
Because
you.
I want to piggyback off what John brought up about the Alaya Vijnana in the storehouse consciousness and the seeds that permeate from that. I was reading into that very exhaustively about a year ago and Yogacara, and it was talking about the consummate and the relative to some degree.
The
And then
imagined.
the imagined, which is the relative. Yeah, it's imagined. And yet that's all still the consummate. So to ascribe that it has intentionality or meaning or it has otherness. Like when we say another universe, I think John brought that up. What about another universe? That would be separate from the void in its,
Yes.
you know, from its onset. The premise right there would be there's something other.
Is that,
Again, I apologize for having used the word universe. I was just trying to get across that there could be an entirely different manifestation, which, as you say, Mark, is not a universe at all. And even Tom Campbell would say that all of these appearances are not universes. It's not that we're in a universe separate from another universe. It's that this particular manifestation is in our mind, but in the same mind, there could be a completely different manifestation. So it's not in another universe in that concretistic sense that I was trying to get at. So that's number one. And number two is, since you brought up the 900 pages by Tom Campbell, it would be a very interesting project to bounce off all sorts of metaphysical literature on Mark and see what he comes up with when he reads that. I know he's not a reader. I know you're not particularly interested in those concepts, but it would be very interesting to see what your mind does with traditional metaphysics when we bounce that off of you. And before you get into the 900 pages with Tom Campbell, I'd have 2 or 3 other books to line up before that because they're smaller.
I would be interested in that. I think that would be, and I'm
If
very,
you can, I don't know if you can even read, because I know
well, I'm not
some
reading.
mystics.
You guys read to me. I'm not reading. I don't know. what to
Okay,
do.
yeah, that's the point.
You're gonna give me a 900-page book. You got to come to me with a paragraph.
Do a YouTube.
No, yeah, that
YouTube,
doesn't
there
work
you go.
because some of these presentations are long, so you have to chew your way through them. So if you can't do that, that's fine. I know of another contemplative, Bernadette Roberts. She died about 4 years ago. She had a phase in which she couldn't read at all. She was just overshadowed, and it was the letters literally dissolved in front of her eyes. So God, in a sense, that's her formulation, did not allow her to read at all for a long time. So it's possible that you can't read, but I think that the literature I'm into would require that you actually read a book for you to tell us what you think about it. But if that's not possible, I quit. But before you read 900 pages, I have a few 200, 300, 400 pages to bounce off on you.
I appreciate that. Hey, and before we move away from the subject, I do want to come back to what you're talking about, John, because Art and both Ashley seem to be familiar with it, and I'm not. John just brought my attention to the, and I don't know how to pronounce anything, so just forgive me, but the Yogacara school, he brought my attention to it, Yogacara school, with the word that you just said, that begins with the A and a V.
Yeah.
Valaya, whatever. But anyway, Art piggybacked on that because he was familiar with it. But I'm curious about what Ashley jumped in, because when she offered that it was the dynamic of imagination. I'm curious, Ashley, because just from my brief looking at the Yogacara, which John just turned me into, is the imagination one of those 8 skandhas, or one of the 8? I don't even know what they call them.
No, that will get us nowhere, because I think she was referring to the 3 nature teachings. She was referring to the perfectly present nature, the dependent nature, and the completely imaginary nature. And those are technical terms. Those are technical terms in the Yogacara school, which have nothing to do with your imagination.
Okay,
except,
thank you.
So let's not get into that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
We can talk about imagination, but not in connection with these 3 nature teachings of the Yogacara.
Yeah, no. All right, well, let me ask, I don't know what to do now, because I'm in a point now where I could either finish going back to the triune and finish, but it's kind of a big thing. We've already been doing this an hour and 40 minutes. So I could either do 2 things, either stop now and we could just talk about anything off topic, unless there's anybody that wants me to go into a whole new thing, which is continuing with the book, but going to a different emphasis. Because what we talked about all this time was how the mirror, everything that we talked about today, or what I intended to, was how everything in this world mirrors the qualities of that which created it, which is aware space. The next thing I want to talk about, and it's so big, maybe we should take it for next time, but it's what I talked about, the self arising. The next thing I want to talk about in the book is just not creation, but how arising is happening right now simultaneously. Oh, and you know what? Maybe what I'll do is instead I'll tease it by telling you what happened to me this week. So that way we'll tease something that we'll pick up on next week. And then we could just talk about various things to kill the time after we're done. But I do want to talk about, I want to hint at what we're going to talk about next week and tell you about a cool thing that happened to me this week with relation to this. All right. So the next week I want to talk about what I call self-arising, or I think in Buddhism, they call it self-origination. It's basically this thing that I keep coming back to is what I think Art mentioned, or is it maybe, yeah, that there is no volition, there is no intention. Everything is implicit in the nature of what it is. By the nature of awareness, that's why it attracts to itself. By the nature of all these things, all these things happen because of the essence or nature of what they are, not because there's any volition, not because of there's any decision. They could not be any other way based on the nature of what they actually are. And somebody's got their mute up. Oh, Sandra, could you turn your mute on? Yeah, thank you. All right, good deal. All right, so this is how I want to end this, and this is how I want to bridge what we're going to talk about next week. So next week I want to talk about with what I call self-arising. And it's what reminds me of what I'd always hear Christians talk about, the virgin birth. And as again, I don't know anything about Christianity, but when you think about what a virgin birth is, something being born from nothing, that's what I'm talking about, self-arising, something coming from nothing. That is the self-arising. That is the self-origination of something coming from nothing. And it just, and then as I was obsessed with that, that's when I started to think about that Christian concept of virgin birth. I was like, wow, like the virgin birth actually sounds like something very profound. And again, I don't know anything about the Bible. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the concept of virgin birth, independent of Christianity, just the virgin birth in itself is what I'm obsessed with. This virgin birth of how something could come from nothing, this self-origination, this self-arising. So what I want to talk about, okay, so what I want to end this is the last talk we had, and I'm gonna have to go through my phone real quick to look at something. The last talk we had, I actually hinted at this. I mentioned that I don't believe in creation. The world never happened, it's happening. And what I said was we're witnessing the act of creation now. We're watching it, it's happening, it's happening. It didn't happen, and now we're watching something else. We're watching the self-arising creation itself happen as we're watching it. All right. So after I said that to you guys, then I look on the my Google News, and all of a sudden in the Google News, what's going on in reality that week is someone came up with a huge discovery in science where now all of a sudden they're questioning the Big Bang. And so what they're saying is, and these are just 3 headlines. If you Google this, you're going to find millions of headlines because everyone's writing articles about this. But what just happened recently, the same week, right after I told you guys that I said, I don't believe in the world was created, there's no Big Bang, the Big Bang's happening. That's literally what I said. And that's actually the reason I said it. Actually, I didn't say it, I read it. I read it in the book where I said the Big Bang is happening right now. We're witnessing the Big Bang. We're witnessing the virgin birth. Then flash forward to science. I'm looking at my Google Science feeds, and here's the 3 top articles for the week based on this new discovery in physics saying that the Big Bang never happened, or it's happening. That's what they're saying. So here's the articles. One is saying, what if the universe had no beginning? It didn't have a beginning. The second article says, did the Big Bang begin from a singularity? Not anymore. The third article says, the Big Bang and time as we know it may be nothing but illusions. So basically, if you read any of these articles, and you just Google the newest, scientific paper that came out with physics about the Big Bang, is they're saying what I was saying, that the Big Bang is happening. It didn't happen. This is it. We're watching the self-arising in time. So anyway, so that kind of bridges together what we talked about last week, and then what we're going to talk about next week, which is the virgin birth, which is the self-arising of something coming from nothing. So to end now, if anybody wants to foreshadow anything I may say about that, any thoughts about that, first that, and then after that, then if anybody just wants to talk about something irrelevant, we could do that. But does anybody have any comment on what I just said just now?
Yeah, Mark,
Yeah.
if you want to maybe entertain, there's a Nagarjuna that talks about non-arising as well.
I love Nagarjuna. I'm just new to him. I love him. He's my favorite. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in that his approach is that it's just total exertion, that it just all appears without dependency, without, you have dependent origination processes that appear to seem linear, but they're not. That self-arising, I would maybe venturing to looking at non-arising.
Oh, you're saying I'm probably using the wrong term, right? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know what your
No.
motivation behind your term is, so I don't know.
I
if
don't
you
know
want-
any terms. I
Yeah.
guarantee I'm saying it wrong.
Yeah.
I would bet all the money I'm saying it wrong. But I'm interested in what you're saying. So could you do me a favor and refer me to something simple I could
Sure.
say, because I love Nagarjuna. Give me some keywords or reference so I could read about what you're talking about.
I have a 1,300-page book.
Not
I'm
that.
kidding.
I'm
I'm kidding, Mark. I'm kidding. I'll send you.
Maybe just give me a couple terms that you're saying. So I'm saying self-arising, and you're saying what I'm probably saying, and I guarantee you're going to be right. I guarantee I'm wrong. What I'm trying to say is non-arising.
I'm not sure yet,
Oh.
but I just want, as you bring that up, the way you were setting up the premise of behind it, it sounds a lot like Nagarjuna's
I'll Google it.
some of his
Non-arising.
treatises. Yeah.
But should I look up Nagarjuna non-arising, or is there something else, Nagarjuna something else I should also look at?
No, that's fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that, because I love Nagarjuna. The reason I love him is because I stepped into the same thing that he stepped into, but he's so much more deeper than me. And what I mean by that is my big discovery in book 2 was what I called I noticed that everything is and it isn't. And I was blown away, and I thought that was the secret to the universe. Everything is and it isn't. Then I dug into Nagarjuna, and he just goes into the same thing even deeper. He was like, not only is it not it isn't, it is and it isn't, but it's not the is and it isn't, and it's not both and it's not neither. And I'm like, that's it. I know that's even deeper what I was saying. It's the same thing, just someone that obviously took the time into, examine it to the point that he could talk about it in all these ways that I can talk about it. But no, my magnet tells me that Nagarjuna is right on target, and I have to catch up to him.
I don't know about that, Mark. I kind of like the fact that you have your own thing going on.
I like it too. I like it too.
There's
I
nothing
appreciate
wrong. I'm very interested. I like meeting people who are having an experience and trying to explain it.
Yeah,
And,
I appreciate that.
it's helpful to have the traditional as a sounding board
Yeah.
to truth, but at the same time, it's also just nice to see someone's experience.
And you're right. And thank you, Rod. You're right. It's symbiotic. I like both, and we need both. We absolutely need both. What I've always said is, whatever path you get into, you should come out of it with, like, let's say if you get into Buddhism, you should practice Buddhism, but in the end, you should have discovered Buddhism plus Rod, or Christianity plus art, or, whatever it is plus you. It shouldn't be the same thing. Although I try, as much as I try to get away from Buddhism, I just find myself mimicking the same words they use anyway. So as far as you try to get away from it, which you're saying, that's the spirit of it, which, by the way, that is the spirit of all these things. They say, drop us, learn us, drop it, learn, drop, learn, drop. So thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Go ahead, John. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, oops, can you hear me?
I can hear you, John.
Oh, yeah, okay, I just have to lower my hand now. My hand irritates. Yeah, I didn't want to, when I wanted to recommend books, I'm still of the same opinion that Rod is, that you see, the only reason I'm interested in you is because you're not one of those traditional guys. Because I have met plenty of very highly realized masters, but you will never get anything from them outside traditional dogma. I already know all that, so you will never get to hear anything from them except that. So that's why I'm interested in, like, let's say, rogue realizers such as yourself, who are not really completely settled yet in their minds. Frankly, I consider you at least partially realized, but a little confused intellectually.
Bewildered?
Yeah, bewildered. And that's so interesting, because we can draw from you because you're closer to us You see, my main guru, he has reached enlightenment something like 500 years ago. The gulf between me and him is just too big. And for me, it's interesting what happens to a budding, like a little chicken that has just hatched the egg, right? That's interesting for us because we're closer to that. But then after that, it becomes interesting to bounce you off against those traditional concepts so that we see what kind of sparks fly then. So that's my motivation. I'm not trying to maybe Rod thinks that I want to make you into a traditionalist. No, that's not my point at all.
I asked you guys. I pester you guys for information.
I'm just interested what happens if your independent insights, you should never think that I expect of you to conform to those traditional concepts. If you contradict that, I'm happy. If you say, no, that's bullshit, great. But I'm still interested in what happens when we rub your mind against those traditional metaphysics. So that's my motivation.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, right? So people may have misunderstood my motivation.
And I think I have a good track record of taking your advice versus not. So you know it's sincere when I take your advice, because I think I have a good track record with that. But I wanna go back to something you said, John, about like the guy you were talking about, the enlightened master for 500 years. You remind me of a feeling I had even when I was little. I feel like my place is really to just be in the threshold, the doorway, so I could explain these things. Like where I live, where I dwell, is I'm pulling information from something so close. But I think what you're talking about, like let's say a classic traditional full enlightenment of the highest master who's going on so many different levels, he's got no more access to talk to you. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in spending my life in this doorway, in the threshold, so I could communicate what's out there to what's out there. Is it the highest place? Is it the highest enlightenment? No, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in fulfilling my role and my strengths of what I'm good at and what I'm attracted to. And I think, John, that's what you're pointing to. That's not what I'm into. I'm interested in staying, not even staying, but just being in, positioning myself to where I could have access to the unmanifest and communicate it into words. I think that's what I'm being used for. And I'm not being used for one of these people who are pooping and peeing themselves in the gutter. It's kind of, everyone has a different purpose. And this is and you know what? The only enlightenment that I'll ever speak about, the only enlightenment that I'll ever speak about is just the enlightenment of not wanting anything and not desiring. No specifics of the enlightenment of the Buddha or this Buddha, the very basic enlightenment of just not wanting anything and no more desires. But I think this ties in with John's thing. I do think that's my purpose. I do feel more attracted to Bodhisattva vow rather than the greatest totalist of all enlightenments. That's where my heart is. That's where I want to be. And physically, I see it as standing in a threshold, opening up the door so I could communicate things there. And I think it has to be that way. So anyway.
Exactly. So you're free to not be so overly responsible. You see, the guys that I used to deal with like 20 years ago, like this master I'm talking about, he has over 1,000 monks under in his responsibility. And beyond that, he has to rake in the money to feed those 1,000 monks. And so he has to appeal to donors in Taiwan and whatnot, all these rich people who donate for these monasteries. So he has no way of deviating that much from tradition, because otherwise, he's going to be accused of all sorts of things.
You get it. Yeah.
Right? So you're free. You can say whatever you want, and you can make mistakes. These guys cannot make mistakes. They cannot afford to make mistakes. And that's why they're in a sense, they're boring, because you might as well read a book.
I appreciate that.
You're funny. It's
no, I appreciate that,
because I already know all that stuff.
I do appreciate that. But at the same time, I just want to bring it back to, it's a symbiotic relationship between what I'm doing and tradition, because I don't want it to leave it at to where I think tradition's not necessary. I'm trying to go beyond it. I think it's a symbiotic relationship of, like I said, contract, expand. So tradition has its place. So let's say tradition is the conservative aspect. I'm the liberal aspect, where I'm looking to move beyond it and drop it all and to go further. But like I said, it's a simultaneous movement where you need both. You can't have one without the other. So anyway, there's something else I want to talk about, but is there anything else Any questions anybody has before I go into something that's on my mind? Nope, that's it. Okay. I want to go back to something that kind of I started talking about at the beginning. Man, I don't even know how to enter this. I don't even, let me collect myself for a second. Let me think about how I want to say this, because I didn't plan on saying this. Everything I'm trying to do, I'm trying to give you almost a physical, I'm trying to explain there's almost a physical way to orient yourself, to practice. There's almost like a physical a way to be. And I keep coming back to the way physical because it's an actually where you orient yourself with the world. And so I'll talk about ways I've talked about it recently in the past. So we're used to orienting ourselves, looking at the world and all the information, our attention is directed that way. And what I'm saying, physically, if you physically just notice your attention and direct your attention to the unmanifest or what's behind you, you're setting yourself up to be where you're already at. You're just setting yourself up to be just where you're basically your fundamental position, because we're not out here. We're not stuck in the arising. In reality, we are back here, but we find ourselves getting caught up in the arising so much you could believe or feel like in the arising. But the more you practice just staying where you are, you're going to notice that you are the, let's say, the still space for all the moving stuff coming toward you. All right. So what I've been getting this week is something really interesting, going back to the Bodhisattva vow, because we just talked about, John was talking about, crazy levels of total enlightenment. And I'm talking about the Bodhisattva vow. There's something that keeps coming up. And I'm sure I talked about it in my book. It's the EKG signal. If anybody knows what an EKG signal looks like, it's not just a simple wave. So most waves that I describe, they just look like that. But if you actually look at an EKG signal, it has an arising, but before it starts to fall, it has a second arising within that arising. So a heartbeat would actually look like something like that. And I drew a horrible heartbeat, but basically I'm just trying to convey a sense of this movement. And this movement is like the secret to the universe that I just can't seem to put in words. All right, so it's a shape. That's why I keep saying everything is about a shape, or everything is about this physical thing. So everything, first I'm just gonna draw a picture of an EKG heartbeat, and then I'll talk about it. So you have the down, then you have the up collection. Okay, so this would basically be like an EKG signal. And this is the way all of the universe operates. I'm gonna leave this symbol here, and we're gonna talk about evolution. We're gonna talk about the Bodhisattva vow. We're gonna talk about meditation. We're gonna talk about everything, and everything seems to follow this thing, which, by the way, it's just a fractal of a fractal. It's the thing inside of a thing. You see but this is a heartbeat. All right. So this is what I'm trying to say. Oh, and this is also collection. When we were talking about earlier about collection and release, this is what a heartbeat does when it collects and then it releases. This is how it does it. So what I've noticed when I was just talking to John about the Bodhisattva vow, this is what the Bodhisattva vow, the repeating evolution. The way evolution works is you go up. Evolution just doesn't go up like this. That's not the way evolution works. Evolution instead works like this, where you go up and you come back down and you scoop up what you forgot. Then you go up and you scoop back down what you forgot. And that's what evolution works. It's not a straight line. Evolution works where you go up and you collect and you scoop back down, and whatever you missed, then you go back up. Then you scoop back down, then you go back and you pick up whatever it is. That's basically what the EKG signal is. And that's basically what the Bodhisattva vow is. The Bodhisattva vow is you get enlightenment, you're going up there for enlightenment, but you scoop back down and you collect everybody else. Like that's the classic story before enlightenment. You don't take the enlightenment of just saying, I'm going to disappear into the universe and become nothing. I'm going to scoop back down and collect it. We see that model, like I say, in the Bodhisattva vow. We see it in the EKG. We see it in evolution, the way evolutionary works. We see it in every waveform. You could look at it in the stock market. You could look at it as the pulse of life. Nothing is ever a straight line. You hear it in for every step forward, you have to take 2 steps back. That's not a bad thing. They're not telling you the world is fucked up or wrong when you have to take 2 steps forward to go 1 step back, or take a step back forward. That's the way nature works. That is the shape of the universe. And we can, so we bring it back down to our practice. And the reason I want to bring it back down to our practice is because when John turned me onto this concept that later I'll get into, because I couldn't get into it this week, but I'm going to let Art pronounce it. What's the concept, Art, that begins with the A and then a V? Aya?
Alia Vidyana.
That word.
So more quickly, this is an EKG. Notice the baseline is also there. It recedes and protrudes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The base, that's the Dharmakaya and the Samboka Nirmanakaya, all is one, exactly. All right. What I've read, but wait, what did I just say? Okay, so John turned me onto that concept this weekend. And so I had to Google it because I've never heard of this concept. But when I Googled it, I came up to an incredible conversation that taught my meditation better than the way I was teaching it. Because like I said, these masters, the more time you spend knowing your mind, the more you're going to know your mind. So these masters know infinitely more than me. So now I want to go back and end with a practice that I gave you guys last week with just the slightest nuance of this master that gave the same practice, but in a way that I thought was better because he's more practiced. All right. So remember before I was always on to this thing where I was saying the only practice that we could ever do, the only practice that we're capable of doing is staying where we are and then notice when the arising happens. And the moment you notice the arising, just drop. Simple as that. Just drop back and then you'll notice the arising because the arising will happen. And then you just, when you notice the arising, just drop. And then the picture that I drew is the more you practice, the more this will happen. So to someone who's not practicing, their lives are going like that. Maybe when a death happens, they'll drop down. Maybe when they lose their job, they'll drop down. But for the most part, they're just staying up in the arising. Then let's say you learn about meditation. Now you're practicing. Now you drop down, but it's too hard, so you go up down. So that's basically all these different things are. And that's why I was saying I don't give a fuck about enlightenment, because this then down here, it's the same thing. If you're in love with this, spend as much time with it as you want. You know what I mean? That's all enlightenment is. This is the gift, not enlightenment. This is the gift, just being flat and staying where you are. However much you enjoy staying where you are, that's the degree you're going to stay where you are. And that's why it doesn't matter. Enlightenment's not important, because all enlightenment is glorifying that flat part, the ground. It's just a glorification of that. So find the ground and increase the time you spend in the ground, and that's it. You know, however much you want to spend there, you're going to find out. But what's my point? I had a point. Yes. Okay. So before my practice was to say, thank you. Before my practice was to say, go about your life, go on in confidence, don't practice, just watch yourself. And then when you notice the arising happen, let the arising be a reminder to drop back down. And then when that happens more and more often. Okay, so as I'm studying this concept of the Ayurveda, whatever it's pronounced, I hear a master describing it. And he describes my exact practice that he's describing. So this is the way he describes it. So this is that word, the ground, that he calls the Vaya Layaya, whatever. And then he says, but now they use the word, so he uses the word flash. So he says, flash is basically when I say, just take your seat of whatever your natural state is. So he used the word flash. He's like, okay, so flash on your basic state. So you take notice of your basic state. And then I'm not saying you wait for the arising, because you're just taking the basic state, but arising will happen because that's what the mind does, is it arises. And when I say arises, it could be a thought, it could be a visual thing, it could be a feeling, just anything you notice, any movement of your mind, you notice the arising, and then that arising, just the recognition of that arising, reminds you to just drop back into here you are. All right, the way he described that though, is he put a whole different spin on this, almost saying like, when you start to arise, it's almost like you're collecting energy from like a water balloon, like you're putting water into a water balloon. And then when you drop, you come back down and you bring that water into the ocean. And then what that does is that brings your foundation even one step lower than what you were before. So it's kind of like a trampoline to where you can just stay here, but if you allow that arising to take you up and then you take it right back down, you're actually, the ground basis is going to be deeper than it was before the arising. And then you stay with that, and then you let the next arising, you use that energy like Kung Fu. You let that energy like Kung Fu, that you take it down even deeper into a deeper ground. And then the way he was describing, if you do that 2 or 3 rotations, by the time you do it the 3rd time, there's nothing left to even do that with. So that's something that I've been super aware of this week. So John, go ahead. What's your comment on that? Since you're the one that inspired that.
That's great. I love that. So this practice, he's practically pointing out the alaya vijnana, I suppose,
Yes.
because there's no way the ordinary person would immediately have access to his completely purified Buddha nature. So whatever you encounter when you flash your basic state would necessarily be some still conditioned ground state. So it's a superficial aspect of the alaya vijnana. And then you go deeper and deeper until you come to the really, really basic alaya vijnana. And then you have to purify that. And then there's Buddha nature. So who was that guy? I like that teaching because you see, that's how you recognize a master. I've listened to tons of teachings, but this way of pointing out the alaya vijnana is completely new to me. That's very fresh. So he knows what he's talking about. So who was that?
I'll send you the link. It begins with a V, Vakaya. I'll send you a link for it. Again, I can't pronounce these things.
Okay.
But I give you all the praise for that, John. See, that's what I'm saying. All these things, it may seem like tradition is contradicting but not. I thrive on the tradition.
No.
I
expect there's not going to be. I expect there's not going to be much contradiction, really.
Yeah. But it's beautiful, so I appreciate that. But anyway, we're past the 2-hour mark, so I don't think I have anything more to say. But if anybody else has any questions or comments, we'll end. Otherwise, I'll let you know. I can't even tell you guys what date I want to do this in November because number one, we're going away for a week, and then we got Thanksgiving. But I definitely I'm not gonna go a month without doing this. But for the holiday season, November, December, hopefully not this January, we'll only do this once a month. I can't even tell you when, but I really appreciate it, guys. This means the world to me. Every day I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm expanding, and I appreciate that. It's because of you guys. It's a symbiotic thing, and I'm glad we talked about that because I'm experiencing that. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate
Happy
it.
Sunday, happy Halloween, Hallows Eve. Woo, be scary, celebrate death. All right, bye, guys.